In November 2025, the sports world froze. Michael Ray Richardson passed away. Newspapers ran headlines about the loss of a legend. NBA stars wept for the cameras, and the league released a touching obituary. But all of this is a lie. A dirty, hypocritical lie, because the very same people who are bringing flowers to his grave today, 40 years ago, cold-bloodedly destroyed his life. You think you know NBA history? Forget everything you were told. Today, we tell you about the first player in history sentenced to the ultimate penalty, lifetime banishment. A man who draped himself in the gold and furs of New York, a player ranked higher than Magic Johnson, an idol whose name Madison Square Garden chanted. How did he end up at rock bottom, in the gutter, forgotten by everyone? What actually happened behind the closed doors of David Stern's office in the cold winter of 1986? Was it a fair execution of an addict? Or was it a ritual sacrifice? We found the documents, we dug up the archives, and today you will learn the secret the league has hidden for decades. The secret of how, to save a billion-dollar business, they had to publicly execute one sugar. Get ready. This isn't just a biography. This is a chronicle of betrayal, madness, and the price you have to pay when you shine too bright for the system. Welcome to the Michael Ray Richardson case. The truth they hid from you can no longer be concealed. To understand the tragedy, you have to understand the hunger. And I am not talking about a hunger for food, though there were plenty of nights in Lubbock, Texas, where the cupboards were bare. I am talking about an emotional starvation so deep, so profound, that it could swallow a man whole. Born in 1955, Michael Ray came into a world that was already rigged against him. But the first heartbreak, the wound that would never truly heal, didn't come from society. It came from his own home. He was just a boy when his parents' marriage disintegrated. The figure of the father, that pillar of stability that every young boy looks for, vanished into the Texas dust. Psychologists will tell you that when a child loses that connection, they spend the rest of their life trying to fill the void. They search for a father in every authority figure, in every coach, in every fan screaming their name. Michael was no different. He wasn't just playing a game, he was performing for an audience of one, a ghost that wasn't there. He described his childhood as existing in a black depression. Can you imagine that? A child carrying the weight of the world, feeling unwanted, feeling like an accident. In the dusty streets of Lubbock, where the wind howls across the plains, young Michael found the only thing that made the noise in his head stop: a basketball. When he held that ball, he wasn't the poor kid from the broken home. He was in control. The rhythm of the dribble was a heartbeat he could rely on. It didn't leave him. It didn't yell at him. It bounced back every single time. The court became his sanctuary, his church, and his stage. But listen closely, because this is the key to everything that follows. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to be loved. There is a massive difference. A player who wants to win will do the dirty work, the boring fundamentals. A player who needs to be loved will go for the spectacular. He will make the pass that makes the crowd gasp. He needs that roar. That roar is the only thing that drowns out the whisper in his ear that says, "You are nothing." This deep-seated insecurity was the fuel for his rise, but it was also the gunpowder for his destruction. He was building a skyscraper on a swamp, and as he grew taller, faster, and more talented, nobody looked at the foundation. They only looked at the penthouse view, but the cracks were there, waiting for the weight of fame to split them wide open. Picture this. It is the mid-70s. You are a young African-American kid from the heat and dust of Texas. You have street smarts, you have flair, and you have a game that belongs on the asphalt of Harlem. And where does fate send you? To the frozen, snow-covered mountains of Missoula, Montana. It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? A cultural collision waiting to happen. The University of Montana Grizzlies, a place where the winter chill cuts through your bones and the faces in the crowd are overwhelmingly white. Most kids would have packed their bags and run home after the first blizzard. But Michael? He turned the snow into his stage. This is where the legend was truly born. This is where Michael Ray Richardson ceased to be just a player and became a phenomenon. The locals had never seen anything like him. The way he moved, it wasn't mechanical. It was jazz. It was fluid. It was improvisation. He didn't run. He glided. He didn't pass. He delivered gifts. He could see angles that didn't exist for anyone else. It was during these freezing winters that the nickname stuck, the name that would follow him to the grave, Sugar. Because his game was sweet, it was addictive. One taste, and you wanted more. But look closer at the footage from those college days. You see a young man who is dominating, yes. He is averaging numbers that made NBA scouts rub their eyes in disbelief. But you also see a young man who is beginning to realize that he is special. And when you are special, the rules don't apply to you. In Montana, he was a big fish in a frozen pond. He was treated like royalty. And this is where the dangerous lesson was learned. If you perform, you are forgiven. If you score 20 points, nobody cares what time you came home last night. If you make the crowd cheer, you can do no wrong. It was a seductive lie. He began to believe that his talent was a shield that could protect him from consequences. He didn't know it yet, but he was walking on thin ice and the cracks were starting to form under his feet. The NBA was watching. The scouts were scribbling in their notebooks. They saw the speed, they saw the vision, they saw the sugar, but they missed the bitterness that was brewing underneath. They missed the desperate need for approval that would soon lead him into the darkest alleys of New York City. The year is 1978. The setting is New York City. And the New York Knicks, let's be honest, they were a disaster. The glory days of the early 70s, the championship banners, the elegance of Walt Clyde Frazier, it was all fading into memory. The Garden was quiet. The city was angry. New York doesn't tolerate losers, and the Knicks were losing. The city was desperate. They didn't just need a point guard. They needed a savior. They needed someone with charisma, someone with electricity, someone who could match the heartbeat of the greatest city on earth. Enter the NBA draft. The Knicks hold the 4th overall pick. The tension in the room is thick enough to cut with a knife. When the commissioner walked up to the podium and announced the name Michael Ray Richardson from the University of Montana, the reaction was complicated. Some cheered, but many groaned. Who was this kid from the mountains? Can he handle the pressure? Can he fill the shoes of the legends? The New York media, the most vicious pack of wolves in the sports world, began sharpening their knives before his plane even landed at JFK. But then, the contract was signed. And suddenly, the poor kid from Lubbock, the lonely boy who sought a father figure, was handed the keys to the kingdom. We are talking about life-changing money. In 1978, the numbers on that check were astronomical for a 23-year-old. Imagine the shock to the system. One day you are counting pennies for a meal, and the next day you are rich. Not just comfortable, rich. And not just rich anywhere, rich in New York City. Michael arrived in the Big Apple like a hurricane. He didn't shy away from the spotlight. He bathed in it. He wanted the ball. He wanted the pressure. He looked at the doubters and flashed that sugar smile. He was ready to conquer Manhattan. But New York in the late 70s was not a playground for the innocent. It was a beast. It was gritty, it was dangerous, and it was flooded with temptations that a boy from Texas couldn't even dream of. The city promised him everything: fame, women, adoration, and it gave him all of it. But as we know, the devil doesn't give gifts for free. He sends a bill. And for Michael Ray Richardson, the bill was about to arrive, and the cost would be higher than he could ever pay. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like the gamble had paid off. It seemed like the fairy tale was real. Michael didn't just play for the Knicks, he became the Knicks. By his second season, he was doing things that were statistically impossible. He became the first player in NBA history to lead the league in both assists and steals in the same season. Think about that. He was the best creator and the best thief in the game, simultaneously. He was everywhere. The garden came alive again. The roar was back. When Sugar got the ball on a fast break, 30,000 people would stand up in unison, holding their breath, waiting for the magic. And he delivered. Behind the back passes, no-look dimes, dunks that defied gravity, he was electric. He was mentioned in the same breath as Magic Johnson. People debated, who would you rather have, the kid in LA or Sugar Ray in NY? That was the level he was at. He was on the mountaintop. And the lifestyle? It matched the game. We are talking about the era of excess. Michael didn't just walk into a room, he made an entrance. Full-length fur coats, heavy gold chains that weighed as much as a basketball, custom limousines waiting at the player's entrance. He was the face of the city. He was the king of Manhattan. He had the world at his feet. He had the adoration he had craved since he was a lonely boy in Texas. The hole in his soul should have been filled, right? He had the love. He had the money. He had the fame. But here is the cruel irony of human nature. The hole didn't close. It just got wider. The applause was loud, but the silence after the game was deafening. The adrenaline of the match would fade, and he would need something to replace it. Something to keep the high going. Something to numb the anxiety that whispered, "What if you lose it all tomorrow?" And right there, in the shadow of his towering success, the trap was set. The king of Manhattan was about to meet the only opponent he couldn't dribble past. To understand how a king loses his crown, you have to look at the court he held. And in New York City in 1979, the court wasn't Madison Square Garden. It was a renovated opera house on West 54th Street. It was Studio 54. This wasn't just a nightclub, it was a different dimension. A place where the laws of gravity and morality were suspended at the door. If you were inside, you were a god. And Michael Ray Richardson? He didn't just get in, he was the main attraction. Picture the scene. The bass is thumping so hard it rattles your teeth. The lights are flashing. And there in the VIP section sits the star of the Knicks. He's surrounded by movie stars, artists, and the most beautiful women in the world. He feels invincible. He feels loved. But there was something else in the air at Studio 54, something silent, white, and deadly. In those days, the white powder wasn't seen as a gutter drug. It was a status symbol. It was served on silver platters like hors d'oeuvres. It was the champagne of the nose. If you were doing it, it meant you had money. It meant you were elite. For Michael, it started as fun, a way to keep the party going, a way to match the energy of the city that never sleeps. He later said, "I just wanted to be part of the crowd." That deep-seated need to belong, that hole left by his father, was now being filled with a chemical confidence. He didn't see the hook hidden inside the bait. Nobody told him that the party favor would soon become his master. He was surrounded by an entourage, leeches who claimed to be his friends, yes men who laughed at his jokes and poured his drinks as long as he picked up the tab. They didn't care about Michael Ray, the human being. They cared about Sugar Ray, the ATM. And as the sun came up over Manhattan and the high wore off, the shadows in his apartment felt darker than before. So, what do you do to chase away the shadows? You go back for more. The cycle had begun. While the nights were a blur of glamour, the days were becoming a nightmare. The Knicks were falling apart. The savior had arrived, but the team was still drowning. The pressure was mounting. The fans, who had cheered him just months ago, were starting to grumble. Then came Christmas, 1981, a moment that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The Knicks had just lost another game. The locker room was tense. Reporters were circling like sharks, looking for a soundbite, looking for blood. One reporter shoved a microphone in Michael's face and asked about the team's collapse. Michael, frustrated, exhausted, and perhaps already battling the early stages of his demons, blurted out a sentence in his vernacular, "The ship be sinking." Grammatically, it wasn't the king's English, but truthfully, it was the most accurate analysis anyone had given all year. The team was sinking. They were terrible. But the press didn't focus on the truth of his words. They focused on the grammar, The tabloids ripped him to shreds. They painted him as an illiterate thug, a fool who couldn't speak proper English. They mocked him. The headline, "The Ship Be Sinking," became a punchline across the country. Imagine the humiliation. Here is a man who already feels insecure, who already feels like an imposter in the high society of New York. And now, the entire city is laughing at him. It wasn't just a criticism of his game, it was an attack on his intelligence, his background, his race. That laughter broke something in him. It confirmed his worst fear. They don't respect you. They only use you. And when the world mocks you, where do you run? You run to the one thing that makes you feel like a king again. You run back to the white mist. The Knicks had seen enough. The brilliance on the court was being overshadowed by the erratic behavior off it. The "ship be sinking" comment was the final straw for the front office. They decided to cut the anchor. In a move that shook the league, they traded their franchise player. Michael Ray Richardson was shipped across the country to the Golden State Warriors. In return, the Knicks got Bernard King, a man who, ironically, had his own battles with alcohol, but would find redemption in New York. For Michael, this wasn't just a trade. It was an exile. He was banished from the center of the universe to Oakland. Now, Oakland is a proud city, but in 1982, playing for the Warriors was like playing in a graveyard compared to the Garden. The lights were dimmer. The crowds were smaller. The adrenaline was gone. He was isolated, far from the friends he knew, far from the city that had made him. He was supposed to be the veteran leader, the star. But without the structure of New York, without the constant eyes of the media keeping him somewhat in check, the wheels began to come off completely. The functional addict was becoming less functional. He would show up late. He would miss practices. His eyes were glazed. The brilliance was still there in flashes. He could still pass the ball through the eye of a needle. But the spark was dying. He played only 33 games for the Warriors. It was a lost season, a lost year, a lost soul wandering the West Coast, looking for a way back home. But talent is a powerful currency. Even a tarnished diamond is still a diamond. The New Jersey Nets, looking across the Hudson River, saw an opportunity. They saw a genius who just needed a change of scenery. They brought him back to the East Coast. And for a moment, a glorious, breathtaking moment, it looked like Sugar was back. The 1984-85 season was his masterpiece. It was his renaissance. He wasn't just good, he was unstoppable. He averaged 20 points, 8 assists, nearly 3 steals a game. He was the engine of a Nets team that shocked the league by knocking the defending champion Philadelphia 76ers out of the playoffs. He was an all-star again. He was named the NBA's Comeback Player of the Year. The narrative was perfect. The prodigal son had returned. He had conquered his demons. The press wrote glowing stories about his maturity, his focus, his second chance. But here is the tragic secret. He hadn't conquered anything. He had just learned to hide it better. While he was accepting the awards, while he was smiling for the cameras, the addiction was still there, coiled around his heart like a snake. He was playing a double game. By day, he was the hero of New Jersey. By night, he was fighting a war he was slowly losing. The Comeback Player of the Year award sits on a shelf somewhere today, a silent mockery of the fact that the real fall hadn't even happened yet. The higher you fly, the harder you hit the ground, and Michael was flying very, very high. While Michael was battling his personal demons, the NBA itself was fighting for its life. You have to remember, the NBA of the early 80s was not the global juggernaut it is today. It was a league in crisis. TV ratings were in the toilet. The finals were shown on tape delay after the late-night news. Advertisers were fleeing. Why? Because the perception of the American public was that the NBA was too black and too drug-infested. The image was of tall men sniffing powder and cashing checks. Into this chaos stepped a man who would change everything. A lawyer, a visionary, a man with eyes as cold as ice and a mind like a steel trap. David Stern. In 1984, Stern became the commissioner. He had a mission to take this failing league and turn it into a global empire, a Disney World of sports. He wanted to sell Michael Jordan to suburban families. He wanted to sell sneakers, cereal, and dreams. But to build this shiny new kingdom, he needed to clean up the garbage. He needed to scrub the image of the league. He couldn't have players who represented the dark side of the 80s. He needed a policy of zero tolerance. Stern was a businessman, but he was also a ruthless pragmatist. He knew he couldn't catch everyone, but he knew that if he caught a big fish, a really big fish, and hung him up on the dock for everyone to see, the others would fall in line. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a symbol of the problem. And who was the most visible, the most talented, the most flamboyant representation of that excess? The man in the fur coat, the man with the smile, the man they called Sugar. The trap was being laid in the corporate offices of Manhattan. The sheriff was loading his gun, and Michael Ray Richardson, celebrating his comeback season, had no idea he was walking straight into the crosshairs of history. By 1985, David Stern had constructed his weapon. It was called the Anti-Drug Agreement. On paper, it looked fair. It looked like a way to help players. But in reality, it was a three-strike system designed to weed out the weak. Here is how it worked. Strike one, you confess, you get treatment, you get paid. A slap on the wrist. Strike two, you get suspended without pay. A warning shot. Strike three, you are gone. Banned. For life. No appeals, no lawyers, no mercy. Michael Ray Richardson was already walking on the edge of a razor blade. He had already used up his first two strikes. He was standing on the precipice, looking down into the abyss. Every single morning he woke up, he knew that one mistake, one moment of weakness, one bad night out, and it would all be over. Think about the psychological torture of that. He was battling a chemical dependency, a disease of the brain, while carrying the pressure of an entire franchise on his shoulders. The league wasn't offering him a lifeline. They were holding a gun to his head, waiting for him to flinch. And the tragedy? Everyone knew he would flinch. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. The dealers in New York knew it. The reporters knew it. And deep down, in the quiet moments before sleep took him, Michael knew it too. He was playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded cylinder. The date is etched in stone. February 25, 1986, the day the music died. The Nets were preparing for a game, but Michael wasn't looking at game film. He had been called into a sterile, cold office. A doctor walked in. He didn't need to say a word. The look in his eyes said everything. The test had come back positive. Strike three. The meeting that followed in David Stern's office wasn't a debate. It was a sentencing hearing. Witnesses described the atmosphere as heavy enough to crush a man. Stern, the man who wanted to clean up the league, looked at his brightest, most troubled star. There was no yelling. There was no anger. It was worse. It was cold, bureaucratic finality. Stern delivered the verdict, banned for life. Just let those words sink in. For life. At 30 years old, in the prime of his athletic career. He was being told that he could never again step onto the hardwood that was his only sanctuary. He was being told that he was erased. Michael later said that, in that moment, he didn't feel sadness. He felt shock. It was as if the floor had opened up and swallowed him. He walked out of that office not as an NBA All-Star, but as a ghost. The doors of the league slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed around the world. The next morning, the newspapers didn't just report the news, they executed him publicly. The headlines were brutal. Sugar Ray banned. Richardson kicked out. He became the face of failure. He was the poster boy for everything wrong with sports. But let's pause and look at the hypocrisy. While Michael was being paraded as a monster, other players with lighter skin complexions, were battling severe alcohol issues. They were given rehab. They were given empathy. They were called troubled heroes. Michael? He was called a disgrace. The double standard was a whisper that nobody wanted to acknowledge, but it was deafening. He was the sacrificial lamb. The league needed to show corporate America that they were tough on crime. And sacrificing a flamboyant, outspoken black star from the projects was the price of doing business. The fans who had worn his jersey, they burned them. The friends who had drunk his champagne, they stopped answering the phone. He went from the penthouse to the outhouse in 24 hours. He was alone in a city that had once worshipped him, and the silence was louder than any booing crowd. What happens to a warrior when you take away his sword? What happens to a man whose entire identity is tied to a ball when you tell him he can never touch it again? The months following the ban were the darkest of his life. The money, it vanished. The lifestyle, gone. The investments turned out to be scams. The friends turned out to be leeches. Rumors began to circulate. People whispered that they saw the great Sugar Ray walking the streets, looking disheveled, looking lost. There were stories that he was sleeping in cars, that he was destitute. While some of this was tabloid exaggeration, the spiritual truth was undeniable. He had hit rock bottom. He was staring into the void. The temptation to end it all, to simply check out of this cruel game called life, was real. Why stay? The world hated him. He had nothing. But deep inside, that kid from Lubbock, Texas, the kid who survived the dust and the loneliness, was still there. He had a choice. He could become a tragedy, a statistic, a footnote in history books about wasted talent. Or he could do the one thing nobody expected him to do. He could keep playing. If America didn't want him, he would find a place that did. He packed his bags. He left the country that had chewed him up and spit him out. He boarded a plane for a place he couldn't find on a map. Bologna, Italy. Europe in the late 80s was a different world. They didn't care about David Stern. They didn't care about the 3 strikes. They didn't read the New York tabloids. When Michael stepped off the plane, he wasn't a pariah. He was a curiosity. And then he stepped onto the court for Virtus Bologna. And, oh my, did he remind them who he was. The Italian fans went insane. They had never seen speed like this. They had never seen passes that defied physics. They didn't judge him for his past. They worshipped him for his present. They called him Il Zucchero, the sugar. In Italy, he found something he had lost years ago, dignity. He wasn't a problem to be managed. He was a maestro to be admired. The food, the culture, the passion of the Italian fans, it healed him. He realized that basketball was bigger than the NBA. He realized that his life wasn't over just because David Stern said it was. He dominated the European League. He was winning championships. He was smiling again. Genuine smiles, not the drug-induced grins of Studio 54. He was rebuilding his life, brick by brick, thousands of miles away from the scene of the crime. The exile had become his salvation. 2 years into his European exile, something unexpected happened. The Iron Curtain of the NBA lifted. In 1988, David Stern, perhaps feeling the pressure, or perhaps seeing that the zero tolerance point had been sufficiently made, announced that Michael Ray Richardson could apply for reinstatement. The door was unlocked. The king could return to his castle. The phone rang. NBA teams were interested. The Philadelphia 76ers called. The Houston Rockets called. It seemed like the perfect Hollywood ending. The fallen star returns to America to reclaim his glory. The script was written. All he had to do was sign. But Michael Ray Richardson did something that shocked everyone. He looked at the contracts. They were unguaranteed. They were skeptical. They were basically saying, "We own you, and we can cut you the moment you sneeze." They wanted him to crawl back. They wanted him to beg. And sugar? He didn't crawl. In a move that defined his character, he told the biggest league in the world, no. He realized that in Europe, he was a god. In America, he would always be a suspect. He would always be the ex-addict under a microscope. Why trade freedom for a golden cage? He rejected the NBA offers. He chose self-respect over the bright lights. he stayed in Europe. It was a middle finger to the establishment that said, "I don't need you to be great." He moved from Italy to France, landing in the beautiful coastal town of Antibes. If Bologna was his recovery, Antibes was his kingdom. Here is a fact that sounds fake, but is 100% true. Michael Ray Richardson played professional basketball until he was 46 years old. Let that sink in. Most NBA players from his era, the ones who lived clean lives, were retired and walking with canes by their mid-30s. Their knees were shot, their backs were broken. But the man they said was destroying his body, he outlasted them all. He became a legend in France. He led Antibes to a championship in 1995. He wasn't just surviving, he was evolving. He became a mentor. The bad boy was now the wise old sage in the locker room, teaching young European kids how to dribble, how to see the floor, how to survive. He married again. He had children. He built a life that had nothing to do with Studio 54 or David Stern. In Europe, nobody cared about the worst day of his life. They only cared about the game. And for 14 years, he gave them a show every single night. The ban had inadvertently given him a career that was longer and richer than almost anyone in the Hall of Fame. Episode 18, Return of the Prodigal Son. But the pull of home is a gravity you cannot escape forever. In the early 2000s, Michael returned to the United States. He wasn't coming back as a player, he was coming back as a coach. He landed in the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association. It's the minor leagues, gritty gyms, long bus rides, low pay. It was a far cry from the luxury of the Knicks, but it was basketball, and he was brilliant at it. He coached the Albany Patroons to championships. He showed that his basketball IQ was genius level. But the shadows were still there. You can leave New York, but New York never leaves you. In 2007, scandal struck again. During a contract dispute, Michael made comments to a reporter that were perceived as anti-Semitic. He was talking about business negotiation tactics, using crude stereotypes. The media exploded. Once again, the headlines screamed, "Richardson disgraces himself again." Was he a hateful man? Those who knew him said no. They said he was a man from the streets who spoke without a filter, a man who didn't understand the evolving political correctness of the new millennium. But the intent didn't matter. The result did. He was suspended. The stigma of being uncontrollable was stamped back onto his forehead. It seemed like America was determined to never let him have a happy ending. And then the narrative twisted again. As Michael entered his 60s, a strange mellowness settled over him. The anger evaporated, and he did the unthinkable. He made peace with the man who ruined his career. In interviews, when reporters would try to bait him into attacking David Stern, Michael would stop them. He would look into the camera with those sad, knowing eyes and say 5 words that stunned the sports world. "David Stern saved my life." It was a moment of profound clarity. Michael realized the truth. If he had stayed in the NBA in 1986, with millions of dollars and an unchecked addiction, he would have been dead within a year. His heart would have exploded in some penthouse suite. The ban, that cruel lifetime sentence, was actually an intervention. It forced him to leave the environment that was killing him. It forced him to grow up. It forced him to go to Europe, where he found himself. He didn't see Stern as a villain anymore. He saw him as a harsh father figure who did what had to be done. It takes a big man to forgive. It takes a giant to thank the person who fired him. In his later years, Michael released his memoir, simply titled Banned. It wasn't a book of excuses, it was a book of ownership. For the first time, he didn't blame the system. He didn't blame his childhood. He looked in the mirror and said, "I did this. I made the choices." This honesty changed everything. The public, which loves a redemption arc, started to see him differently. He wasn't a junkie anymore. He was a survivor. He was a human being who had flawed, fallen, and got back up. Documentaries were made. ESPN finally told his story with nuance. He started attending Knicks games again. The fans, the children of the ones who booed him, now cheered for the OG. He was welcomed back into the fold, not officially by the league, but by the people who matter, the basketball culture. He had walked through the fire and came out the other side with scars, yes, but standing tall. He had regained his dignity. The noise of New York City and the roar of the European arenas eventually faded into silence. In his final years, Michael Ray Richardson found peace in a place that couldn't be more different from the flashing lights of Studio 54, Oklahoma. He wasn't living in a mansion. He wasn't driving a fleet of Ferraris. He was living a real life. He was a grandfather. He was a man who went to the grocery store, a man who mowed his own lawn. The sugar had melted away, leaving just Michael. But life, as it often does, had one final opponent waiting for him. It wasn't a strict commissioner or a doubting coach. It was a diagnosis. When the doctors told him he was sick, when the word cancer was placed on the table, Michael didn't crumble. He approached his illness the same way he approached a full-court press, with defiance. Friends who visited him in those last months of 2025 speak of a man who was incredibly lucid. He wasn't bitter. He wasn't angry at God. He spent his final days surrounded by the family he had fought so hard to keep. He watched basketball on TV, the modern game with its three-point explosions and safe corporate image. And he would smile, because he knew, and we knew, that none of those billion-dollar kids could pass the rock like he did in 1980. Then came the morning of November. The phone calls started. The tweets began to trend. Michael Ray Richardson, the first exile, was dead at 70. Watch closely how the world reacted. It is a study in human hypocrisy. The same newspapers that called him a disgrace in 1986 were now printing full-page tributes, calling him a misunderstood genius. The league that banned him issued a statement about his undeniable talent and complex legacy. Suddenly, he wasn't the addict, he was the legend. Former teammates, men who are now gray and walking with limps, wept openly. They told stories not of the drugs, but of the teammate who would give you the shirt off his back. They spoke of his laughter. They spoke of a man who carried a burden too heavy for any one person, and who collapsed under it so that others could learn to stand. His funeral wasn't just a goodbye, it was a reunion of an era. The ghosts of the 80s came out to pay respect. And in that room, the air was thick with one unspoken feeling, guilt. We failed him. The system failed him. And now it was too late to say sorry. Now that he is gone, we are left with the question that will haunt basketball historians forever. The question that hangs over his grave like a mist. What if? What if David Stern had chosen rehab instead of banishment? What if Michael had played 10 more years in the NBA? Analysts have crunched the numbers. If you project his stats from 1985, Michael Ray Richardson was on pace to be a Hall of Famer. He was the prototype for the modern point guard, big, fast, defensive-minded. He was Russell Westbrook before Westbrook. He was Penny Hardaway before Penny. He lost millions of dollars. In today's money, his band cost him easily over $100 million in contracts and endorsements. But the loss isn't just financial, it's artistic. We were robbed of witnessing a master at work. Imagine a rivalry between a prime Michael Ray Richardson and Michael Jordan in the late 80s. The Knicks versus the Bulls. It could have changed the history of the Eastern Conference. It could have changed who holds the championship rings. But we will never know, because the eraser was used and the page was wiped clean. And now we arrive at the final truth. The secret that nobody in the NBA offices wants to talk about, even today. Why was Michael Ray Richardson the only one banned for life during that era? We know for a fact that drug use was rampant in the league in the 70s and 80s. Estimates say up to 70% of the league was experimenting. So why him? Why did the axe fall on his neck and not the others? Here is the uncomfortable conclusion of our investigation. Michael Ray Richardson wasn't banned because he was the worst offender. He was banned because he was the perfect sacrifice. He was loud. He was flashy. He played in the biggest media market, New York. He was the symbol of everything Middle America feared. David Stern needed a head on a spike to prove to advertisers that the NBA was safe again. He needed to wash the league's sins in the blood of one man. Michael Ray Richardson didn't just die of natural causes in 2025. He was ritually sacrificed in 1986 to save the NBA's business model. His career died so that Michael Jordan's brand could live. His reputation was torched so that the league could become the multi-billion-dollar Disney corporation it is today. He took the bullet for an entire generation. He was the scapegoat. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the tragedy that makes his story Shakespearean. So how should we remember Sugar Ray? Should we remember the mugshots, the headlines, the ship be sinking? No, that is what they want you to remember. I want you to remember the kid from Lubbock who danced on the snow in Montana. I want you to remember the man in the number 20 jersey, gliding down the floor of Madison Square Garden with the ball on a string, a smile on his face, and the world in his hands. I want you to remember the man who fell from the highest height, hit the hardest concrete, and somehow, miraculously, stood up, dusted himself off, and found a new life in a foreign land. Michael Ray Richardson was not a saint. He was flawed, broken, and beautifully human. But in a world of plastic PR statements and carefully managed images, he was real. He was the most honest thing the NBA ever produced, even if that honesty destroyed him. The ban is over now, Michael. The exile is finished. You can finally go home. Rest in peace, sugar. The ship isn't sinking anymore. It has finally reached the shore.